Navy SEALs are among the most elite military personnel with intense training that pushes them to the brink of physical, mental, and emotional endurance. So, how does one exit the life of a SEAL and take up the calmer life of a civilian? Our guest today is a former Navy SEAL, an aspiring Olympian, and student of traditional Chinese medicine, among other disciplines, who has traveled the world teaching people how to find freedom in their body, brain, and nervous system. This is the story of the path to inner freedom with Christopher Maher. Christopher, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for the great introduction.
Listen,
I think that might be the best so far. I've been
really?
on a podcast.
Okay. I was going to say, I read those off and always, I study them, but something that's stuck with me is, man, this guy's a Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL. What made you want to go in there and go through that? I mean, tough enough to be in the military and do all these things. You went through the Navy. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. For me, at the time, I knew I needed a challenge, right? And I was in college. I went to boarding school 10 years before I went to college. It was very restrictive. And when I got to college, I decided to learn how to be socialized. And the frat parties and shooting pool in the afternoon and playing basketball in the evening, and going to the gym, and all those things had a greater priority for me because I spent 10 years in boarding school. And because I went at such a young age, I never really had the opportunity to get properly socialized. And so beer pong and all those fun things we play in college seemed more important. And I took it a little too far. And I drank too much. And a school administrator sat down with me. He said, look, I've looked over all of your test scores. I looked over your entrance exams and your test scores, and your ability to show up for class don't match up with your entrance exams. And I'm wondering if we don't challenge you enough. I was like, huh? What's this guy talking about? And he said, I don't think this is the place for you. You don't seem challenged here. And I thought, well, I'm going to curse. I thought, F you. Okay. Who's this ass? Right. I got like a week left of school. Why is he discouraging me not to come back? Right. Or why is he encouraging me not to come back? And I thought, okay, I'm pissed off. I'm going to leave his office. And I started walking back towards my dorm room. And I thought, you know what? He's right. This place doesn't challenge me. I chose a school named Shippensburg University because my swim coach went to college there, and my track and field coach went to college there, and my cross country coach went to college there. And so for me, I looked up to them like they were fathers because I didn't have a dad in my life. And I chose the school for the wrong reason, right? I chose it from an emotional place. And I knew there was a lot more potential inside of me. And so I decided to leave. I moved back to my mother's hometown in Pennsylvania named Shenandoah. It's in what they call the coal regions. It's where very poor immigrant Irish and Polish and Italians moved to. And they were in the coal mines, pushing coal. And at one point, the town was, there was a bar on every corner. And it was basically a hardworking saloon town that was into sports. And I moved back there and I opened up a sandwich shop called the Hoagie King. I bought a bar. I had some money from a trust fund. And after about, 4 to 6 months of getting up, driving to Pottsville, Pennsylvania to pick up cold cuts every morning at the crack of dawn, I thought, man, is this going to be my life? This is way too boring. And one day I woke up and I told my business partner, the shop is yours. I don't want any money. I just don't want to be here any longer. And fortunate for me, one of my buddies I went to boarding school with, his mom showed up on my doorstep shortly after that conversation. And she said, "Hey, would you like to come live at my farmhouse with me and my family?" And I thought, why is she asking me this? I already have a house. And I sat there for a minute and I remember looking at her and I thought, you know what? My life is turning left again. Let me go grab my things. So I went in, I just grabbed a couple pairs of shorts and t-shirts and some shoes and stuff. I said, let's go. And I never looked back. And when I got to her farmhouse, um, another one of my buddies that I went to boarding school with was there too. I thought, what's going on? And we moved from the farmhouse to another house that she purchased. And in the basement, there was a biannual Navy SEAL magazine. And I went down and I lifted it up off the coffee table and I stared at it. And there was this picture of like 7 or 8 boat crews. A boat crew is like is made up of 7 guys, right? And they all have a telephone pole over their shoulder. They're running down the beach. The ocean is to their right. They've got on white t-shirts, and it was a black and white magazine at the time, right? They have on these what looks like gray pants, combat boots, and they're running down the beach. And I'm looking at this, going, "Okay, this is for me. This is what I need. I need someone who's going to challenge me." And a lot of guys that go into the SEAL teams, they have different motivations, like God and country. I was not that guy. Okay. Uh, they, some guys are motivated because, maybe they want to have the experience of violence. Maybe some guys want to have the experience of what it is to jump out of a plane. I, those were none of my motivations. My motivation was like, if I can make it through that program, it's going to give me the opportunity to go through a rite of passage. And I knew I needed a rite of passage, especially because I didn't have a consistent father in my life. And the challenge that I wanted, they gave me and more. Because at the time, I thought it was only about your will. But at the same time, I was very lean, super, super lean, about 1.8% body fat. So my challenge was the cold water, right? I had full blown hypothermia several times. That means my core temperature was about 97.3, 97.4, 97.8, 97.6. I mean, 87.3, 87.4, 87.6 degrees. Okay. And I would go into a stupor because I was so cold. And, when you walk in the door to that place, you go through this little area. And as you get past the watch, you go into the courtyard where they do what they call PT, physical training. You look up to the left, and on the wall it says the only easy day was yesterday. And they kept their promise, right? So each day they heaped on a little more stress, a little more tension, a little more distortion. And it comes in so slowly that you don't even notice it. You don't notice that fundamentally you're changing at an emotional level. Fundamentally, you're changing at a physiological and structural level. Fundamentally, you're changing at a psychological and emotional level and an energetic level. And by the time I got through SEAL training, got into the SEAL teams, your energy is so intense, right? That you're then looking for things that are more intense to try to feel normal, right? So when you're taking a risk, what somebody would consider like that's an enormous risk, that makes you feel okay. And so as I got out of the SEAL teams, and once I made that choice, I knew I needed something that made me feel comfortable and something that resonated with me really well. And the way that I coped when I was in boarding school is that I was an athlete and I was good and I was only joking around. And I thought to myself, what if I really put the effort, the energy, the time, the commitment, access, more discipline, push all the push all the nonsense aside. And I really focused. What could I do? And I thought, I want to get to the Olympic trials. And at the time, I thought that was realistic. What I didn't know is that my body had changed so much. I'd become top heavy. So instead of like thin on top and thick on the bottom, I was thin on the bottom and thick on top, right? So it's like you've got the Hulk run, running around on these pencils. And I ended up with a lot of overuse injuries, right? So I had plantar fasciitis, runner's knee, iliotibial band friction syndrome. I got compartment syndrome in my left calf. I ended up with major amounts of tendonitis on the outside of my hip. Then I got in a car accident and I had all this pain in the center of my hip. And so it kept going deeper into my body. And then it got into my low back and then my left shoulder, elbow, wrist, and neck. And so all on my left side, I was in constant discomfort. But the most debilitating level of pain came from the interior of my hip, right? Like right down there at the socket. And there was this constant throbbing that never went away. So whether I was walking, hopping, skipping, jumping, it was always there. Yet the mindset that I had was a SEAL team mindset, meaning that if you don't mind the pain, it doesn't matter. Push through and move on and get to your goal, right? Get to your objective. And so I was mission oriented, and mission oriented means that my perceptual filters at the time were very rigid. And so my sense of self was coming from the things that I achieved and I experienced rather than from how I was being. And what I mean by being is, am I being open minded? Am I being empowered? Am I being peaceful? Am I communicating well? Am I authentically self expressed? Am I internally honest? Am I passionate and creative? Am I humorous? Right. So when my objective had greater precedence over how I was functioning at an emotional level and a psychological level and an energetic level, it left me with consistent levels of discomfort at a structural level, but that also started to shift into physiological dysfunction. So I started losing my vision, started losing my hearing. And I remember one friend pulled me aside and was like, man, your sentence structure, it doesn't always make sense. Like you spend 30 minutes going all the way around the outside to get to a point, and it's very difficult to track the point that you get to is genius, but it seems like there's a different way to do this. And at that time, I wasn't tracking how I was communicating or how I was self-expressing or the route of my delivery. And as with all things with me, initially I was offended, right? I wanted to defend my position, but I kept a good face on the outside. And then when they left, I thought about it and I started tracking how I was communicating. And I realized, like, whoa, something's wrong here. And when you finally wake up inside of your own hell, inside of your own dysfunction, there's no way to pretend it any longer, right? When you don't know, you don't know. I didn't know, right? And I think understanding and communicating my thoughts has always been important to me. I was very philosophical from a very young age. I was extremely deep thinker when I was in college. My nickname was Deep. I remember there's a really amazing man named Darren in my life that I went to boarding school with, and he was older than me, and he tells this story of me being about between, I guess, maybe 10, 11, 9 years old. I don't remember exactly. He said, I'm sitting next to you at a football game, and I'm thinking, who is this little boy teaching me all these things about life? Because that's who I was. And so when my nature was exposed to me in a way that was dysfunctional, meaning that I was being dysfunctional in my own nature, that is what hit me the hardest. It wasn't the pain in my body. It wasn't the insomnia. It wasn't the loss of vision, the loss of hearing. Um, it wasn't the emotional separation. It was that conversation. And that started to wake me up. And then I started to ask questions. How did I get here? Why is it this way? Who do I get help from? And then one day I reached out. I reached out for help. And of course, I reached out to someone who had gone through training like I did, had a similar background to mine as a child. And he offered me some help, right? He brought a yoga mat and a juicer to where I was living at the time. And he said, hey, check this out. And we went into it. He could get into all the positions. I could get into none. And the juice to him tastes like something that was nourishing and powerful. To me, it tasted absolutely disgusting. And I had an epiphany. I had a wake up in that moment. I realized he's fit and healthy. I'm fit, but I'm unhealthy. And then that was a tough pill to swallow because, I'm from Pennsylvania, right? So I'm doing the things that I think are healthy. I'm eating my Wheaties, which is garbage, right? Making my fruit salad. I'm eating my my fruit cocktail in the morning out of a jar. And I'm doing all the things that I think you're supposed to do when you're healthy. In terms of Pennsylvania standards, well, those would be very healthy. But in terms of California standards, that wasn't health at all. And I had to look deep inside at my own level of frustration and agitation with me getting further away from my objective, the harder I worked, right? So when you work harder and you're more committed, you're more consistent, you're more disciplined, you're more honest with yourself, and you get further away from your objective, it has you start to question life. Or let me make it personal. I chose to then question life. And as I questioned life and as I prayed and I asked for help, people started to show up. I started engaging in things like Rolfing, Feldenkrais, the Gasku method, acupuncture, acupressure, meditation, hot yoga, regular yoga. And they were all taking me an inch down the road, yet ultimately I needed a mile. I needed to go a mile in order to get back to some level of homeostasis that would allow me the opportunity to connect, one, to who I really was, and two, what I really wanted to create for a life, right? My choices before that time were based on my desire to be seen and to be recognized. And look, anyone can understand that. If you don't have a father around and you're in a boarding school and you're not getting consistent levels of affection and attention and connection, you have no reflection that you have value outside of your achievements. And so I was achievement driven. And what could be more difficult to achieve than to become a US Navy SEAL or to become a doctor or to become an Olympian? And I was choosing things that were really what people would consider difficult things to do. And once I removed enough tension and enough stress and enough distortion, what happened is I was no longer interested in those things, right? I was interested in how could I devote my life to help others achieve and experience the things that they want in terms of who it is they really are. And so my healing path became my vocation, and it became my dedication, and it became my mission. And that's why we're on the call today, right? Because, I've spent the last 25 years, like your father, we had an opportunity to talk flying around the world. seeing who had something that could produce a consistent, repeatable, verifiable result that I would value and other people could value. And so I've turned my life towards being extremely consistent with the removal of tension, stress, and distortion so that people can get a sense of who it is they really are and transcend the circumstances they were born into to find peace and happiness in their heart and their mind and become the servant that they desire to be at an emotional level, at an energetic, at a psychological, at a physical level. And so now I spend my days devoted to that path. And, the journey was different than I thought it was going to be. And I'm happy to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. I mean, a really, really fascinating story, Christopher. And your journey is such a special one. When I listen to that and, seeing how much you put yourself through, even in childhood, the stressors, the emotional stress, and then putting yourself in this position of constant stress in the Navy SEALs, and then having to unravel some of that as well, because the stress built up. And of course, too much stress goes there. My father didn't follow that path, but he was born post World War II, Poland, Warsaw, very poor, and had a hard childhood, let's say that way, stress in its own right. Very different than my childhood. He came here to give me a much better childhood that didn't have as much stress. And I have to say, when I hear that you were pushed into these wonderful paths and everything, the stress has something to do. That's part of the journey, as it was with my father. And a lot of times I feel and I hear from stories of patients a little bit of loss in where they are and not going forward with a path. And oftentimes there aren't the stressful. When you ask about their child, it was great. I didn't have my, this and that. Do you bless your stress? Do you bless the past and everything that even childhood traumas and Navy SEAL pushing? Is that like a blessing to you now? Or is it still, man, that was really tough and I'm still dealing with that?
I mean, I would say maybe 22 years ago, my mindset would have been like, whoa. As I started to uncover the stress, what I mean by that is this.
Yeah.
When you start opening up your body, right? When you go through a true transformational process, you have to experience all the things that were trapped underneath, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as I started to continue to put my efforts towards greater states of freedom, I became more gracious around all the things that I went through. And so maybe some of the judgments and the criticisms and the disapprovals that I had for, teachers or other students or people in my family, those all vanished. They all disappeared. And I looked at all of those as, without those, I wouldn't be who I am today. And if I love who I am, I have to thank all of those people who helped me pile all of those intense amounts of stress, what we would call distress, inside my body, my brain, and my nervous system. And so on one end, yeah, for sure. In this position, yes. While I was going through the things that I was going through, no. Because I was young and I was immature and the periscope that I was looking through, the aperture was too small. And as I started to remove the tension, to decrease the stress, the aperture got larger. And then I started to look at things from above as opposed to look at things from the same level. And that's why for me, freedom is the pathway to happiness. And what I mean by that is that I used to tell people all the time, you can try to find love, but if you're not free and you don't find freedom first, the love that you have is going to turn into codependency.
Mm.
Right. And I wanted to be sure that the path was honest. The path was integrated, the path was secure, and the path was true. So then I started to involve all of these other people to then experiment to see, did it produce the same exact result for them that it did for me? And then once I got that confirmation, I got into an even greater state of gratitude. Because now when you can take, and this is a common saying in America, when you can turn lemons into lemonade, and now I can teach other people to do so, when I look back with a sober mind, okay, outside of fantasy, I have to come to one simple realization that I am a result of my circumstances. And when I get into a greater state of freedom, I'm now at choice. And when I'm at choice, what can I now co-create? And then, for me, it became even more spiritual. Like I went to boarding school for 10 years. We were required to go to a non-denominational church. I was read to from scripture every Sunday for 10 years. At boarding school, there was no choice. Everyone had to go to church. Okay. And then if you fell asleep in church, guess what happened? After church, you had to do all the dishes. Okay. You had to scrub all the pans and all the pots. You had to clean all the floors. You had to clean the kitchen. You had to clean up the dining room all by yourself if you fell asleep in church. So you really had to do whatever you could not to doze off. Because, well, guess what? The other students that are in your student home, they're motivated for you to fall asleep because they want to watch the rerun of the Penn State football game while you're doing the dishes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had an understanding of basic spiritual principles, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Knock and the door shall be open. Ask and you shall receive. God helps those who help themselves, right? And so those messages were clear because they were repeated again and again and again and again and again and again. And that was a very strong, consistent foundation. What I learned as I started to remove tension, stress, and distortion, I started to have my own orientation towards spiritual principle. And I started to learn about it with context, right? And when you're 7 years old and your mind's in a precognitive state of function, and someone is projecting scripture into your mind, you're doing everything you can to make that reality. And the reality is that isn't reality. The reality is that's a beautiful message, but life isn't simply a message. It doesn't fit in a fixed pattern, right? Life is gray. I was living a very black and white lifestyle. If I did this, I was good. If I did that, I was bad. And my reality was personally subjective, right? And as I started to strip away the tension and the stress and the distortion, the harsh inner critic lost his position. And suddenly he shifted from black and white into the gray. Oh, wow. Maybe the reason why they're late for Thanksgiving isn't because they don't give a shit. Maybe it's that they got a flat tire.
Mm.
Maybe it's because their dog got out this morning and they had to chase them around the neighborhood for 25 minutes and they didn't expect that. And I suddenly became more spacious with myself. And as I became more spacious with myself, I became more understanding with others, and I withheld harsh judgments, harsh criticism, harsh disapprovals. And I stepped away from an overly moralizing position into someone that was very spacious and very understanding and very caring and very investigative to what's really going on and how can I assist you. And so I transcended religious and biblical messages and philosophies and ideologies into becoming humane. And in order to do that, I had to strip away and prove all of the beliefs that were projected into me. I had to prove them false. And as I proved more than false, I became more gracious. I became more understanding. I became more open minded. I became more empowered. I became more healing, more forgiving, more transformative, more loving, more accepting, and more genuine. And because I was being these ways, I was drawing these ways of functions out of others that I was sharing space and time with. And so the transcendence of that is what helped me get into greater states of freedom, but also discover more about the process of life and how it impacts human consciousness, how it impacts the way we breathe, how it impacts the way we move, how it impacts the relationships we choose, how it impacts what I eat, how it impacts when I choose to sleep, how it impacts what I choose to surround myself with. And it became more evident, it became more clear, I became less confused as I started to delve into this process of reducing lifetime accumulated stress that was individual, yet also generational, familial, and communal. And I started to wake up. And as I started to wake up, I became more inspired to help others wake up and get free from what I call the stress matrix so that I could be in the world, yet I wouldn't be of the world.
Mm.
I could be in the world and yet I would not be of the world. And so I could move through this plane of existence free to make my own choices that were in alignment with my own set of personal ethics, morals, values, and principles that I felt were aligned to my nature. And I started to discover, you know, whenever I would get upset, I would discover, well, what's that really about? And got more in touch with me. I got more in touch with my fragmented inner child who really, all he really wants is affection and attention and love. And the things he's scared of most is affection and attention and love. And so it's been a journey. You know, when you're 3.5 years old and your babysitter wants to teach you to not play with matches, and her way of doing it is to put your hands on a gas stove and give you third plus degree burns, and your skin is so charred that they have to remove skin from your buttocks and your thighs in order to put them on your hands so you can have functional grip and do things that other kids do. And you're in and out of hospitals on a regular basis. And so I had a lot of skin grafts. I spent a lot of time in hospitals. I was gassed a lot. I was drugged a lot. And I was a little boy who was severely depersonalized. I stuttered. I wet the bed. Um, I was, I hid every one of my mistakes. I did everything that I could to avoid punishment, rejection, humiliation, violence, discomfort, and pain. And I started applying those strategies as a very young child to survive my circumstances. And, you know, to be able to transcend all of that in one life, right? Okay. That's quite a trick. Okay. Like it's a trick to be able to do that. And so you can understand why at 29 years old, I'm losing my hearing. At 31 years old, I'm losing my vision. At 33, you can understand why I need a full blown hip replacement. All you have to do is look over the course of my life and go, yep, 2 + 2 = 4, 3 + 3 = 6. If you're in reality and you're willing to have a sober mind. And so all the symptoms that I had, all of the challenges that I had were coming from unresolved trauma, generational stress and tension and distortion. And I manifested the expression of those as pain, as discomfort, as confusion, as anxiety, as anger, as self righteousness. As I reduced all of that, I got the exact opposite. Instead of expressing through anxiety, I was expressing through excitement. Instead of expressing through anger, I was expressing through love. Instead of expressing through fear, I was expressing through confidence. Instead of expressing through self righteous position, I was expressing through righteous behavior, thought, and feeling and action. And, this journey that we're on has been my school. It has been my university, right? Pain has been my university to waking up and to becoming more conscious, to becoming more enlightened, to becoming more aware, and then choosing to share, right, with others those enlightenments, those awarenesses, that consciousness, that wakefulness.
Yeah. When I listen to your journey, it's so impactful. And I hear, the words, the stress, distortion and tension and trauma. And it seems that, your story is yours, but so many people carry that themselves. Today, especially, we do live in this stress matrix.
Yeah.
They may not have the traumatic experiences you went through to that level. But we as humans don't usually put those levels. It's just stress and trauma. We associate the levels ourselves.
Yeah.
I was having this discussion with someone recently. When you're look at what kind of a upbringing you would want if you could go back and do it all over again. People say, well, I wish I was born to millionaire parents and I didn't have to do anything. Those are the people at some of the highest suicidal rates. They carry their own stress and trauma, as we all do.
Yeah.
And it impacts them incredibly, sometimes much more than someone who's been actually abused in some ways. So, you can't really put a number to it and say my stress and trauma is more than yours. But I think what you could do is look at the patterns that we all deal with stress and trauma. And you were able yourself to figure out, how do we resolve that? How do we go back? How do we become more authentic and start to do that? I would love to hear, with your work, with what you're doing, how are you getting other people to do that? How are you guiding people to become more authentic, to resolve their trauma, to stop living in the stress matrix, which is black and white, which is disempowerment, which is non-freedom, right? No choice. Because I see it way too much. I see young people that should be healthy coming in the doors of our clinic feeling that way, feeling completely disempowered, completely with no choices, solutions, and just lots of trauma unresolved, not wanting to even touch it, living in this black and white world where everything is bad. They're a victim of everything. And how do do you start to work with someone to stop the vicious disease cycle of what that is and spiraling down and uplift, evolve, and empower people?
I do it by creating a successful pattern interrupt.
Mm.
And when you look at a human, or any species, right? You look at a dog or cat or a lion with, that has a maimed paw, right? When when any species is in pain, they're willing to reach out and put aside, right, their belief system that was projected into them because they want to get out of the pain. So the people who find me, they're already motivated and they already have some semblance of honesty that has either been delivered to them through a loved one or they've had some experience in their life that has woken them up to go, whoa, I need help. And so again, they're already motivated when they get to me. What I do is the first step is education. And they have to read my book. I tell everybody, look, if you're not willing to read my book, if you're not willing to take a small risk, like a small risk for me is like spend $19, right? If you're unwilling, like a burger in Los Angeles costs more than $19 now, right?
Right.
Like if you're worth less to you than a hamburger, you and I aren't going to have a conversation. But if you get to the point where you're willing to take the smallest level of risk, read the book called Free for Life, A U.S. Navy SEAL's Unique Path to Inner Freedom and Outer Peace. If you're willing to read that, now every chapter, you're going to go, uh-huh, 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 uh-huh. And hopefully by the end of the book, you're like, I got to figure out how to get in contact with this guy. And so the first step for me is education. They have to jump through a hoop. If people don't jump through a hoop, they're not vested. If you're not vested with putting some of your own energy in, right? That's a book. Maybe it takes you 3, 4 hours, 5 or 6 hours to read, depending on your ability to digest information and understand. If you're willing to do that, now you feel like, hey, I put in some time, some energy, and effort. I'm going to take another risk. I'm going to email this guy at support@truebodyintelligence.com. They send an email. Guess what happens? Christina, my assistant, she gets back to them and we get on the phone. And when I'm on the phone with them, I simply go, they start talking and I think they think that I'm going to be directing them and I don't. I just want to hear what they have to say. And I go, how can I help you? They go, well, I thought, do you have any questions? And I go, no. What's going on? That's it. What's going on? And I think they feel this spaciousness inside of me because I've achieved what I call a state of neutrality. I add nothing, I take nothing away. I see things for what they are. And all I'm here to do is help and guide you. Right. So when you're in neutrality and you're with people, people are willing to offload some very hidden, difficult things that they've been dealing with. And some of it is childhood trauma. Some of it's work trauma. Some of it is relationship stress. Some of it's financial stress. And as I provide that open container, they start sharing, and I mean going really, really deep. And I listen, and that's it. And I go, okay. And at the end, I go, if you want to move forward to the next thing, let's have another conversation. Like, I get you. I see where you're at. I understand. All right. I've been there too. And I relate with them, right? I've experienced all the forms of stress and tension and trauma that a human can experience. So there's nothing anyone's ever brought to me or I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't understand that. Or no, I couldn't help you with that because I know the limitations of the human body because I lived them. I pushed it to its edge. I took in every bit of stress, every unique form of stress that you can. And I resolved every one of them. And so when we're on the phone, I'm there to make them feel secure. When people feel safe and you build rapport with them, they're willing to take a bigger risk. And so for me, it's about education, right? Then spaciousness, and then rapport. And guess what happens? We have trust. And once we have trust, the risk for them seems riskless. But if we don't have rapport, if they don't have education, if they're not emotionally vested, if I'm not relating to where they're at, we have distrust. And in distrust, people take no risk at all. And so the way that I help them is I took a risk, right? I called people like, hey, I found you on the internet. It says you do this, this, and this, and I'm struggling with this. Do you think you could help me? And they're like, sure. And I went down there and I threw down my dollar bills. I put in my time, my energy, my effort. I applied their suggestions and I saw how far they could take me. And then once I got where they could take me, I went to the next person. And so I've created the same process, except what I did add to that process is I added education. Because my feeling is this: even if a person chooses to not move forward because the risk seems too great, at the very least, they have the education now. They know what tension is. They know what trauma is. They know what trauma is. They know what emotional distortion is. They know that everything that they're doing is to avoid punishment, rejection, humiliation, discomfort, and pain. And those seeds have been planted. They may sprout 3 years down the road. They may sprout 5 years down the road. My job is to simply inform them that we can create a successful pattern interrupt for you, and you could have a different life. And if that's what you want, I'm your guy. I got your back. This is easy.
Do you find the people that are coming to you, you mentioned this, they're already at a state, it's almost like they've hit rock bottom. They're desperate in a sense to do that.
Yeah.
Do you find that people really do need that? Because I was even listening to something the other day that says we as humans in general, usually at any cost try to avoid that rock bottom, that pain, that discomfort, that unease, right? And we're very good at it so that we kind of stay in this bottom tier of life. And we don't ever hit rock bottom that will propel us up. So we avoid bankruptcy, or we avoid leaving that person or anything. And we're unhappy with it, but just unhappy enough we can live with it. If we hit rock bottom, we wouldn't live with that feeling, and it would propel us to change something. So my question is, do you feel more people should just give in to this idea that rock bottom is actually a beautiful place? Don't live in just enough discomfort that you could bear with the pain and you not actually act on it, but fall into the discomfort, fall into the fear, the doubt. And yes, you may fall rock bottom, but that is actually the place where it all starts. And then you find someone like yourself.
Yeah, that's a brilliant insight, Juan. I think for each individual, it's a little bit different. And what I mean by that is this: if you grew up in an environment where you feel safe and you feel recognized and you feel loved and cared for and valued, when you're taking a risk, it never feels like risk. But when you've been ignored, when you've been punished, when you've been humiliated, when you've experienced violence, a risk seems like, ooh, that's too much. I'd rather endure, because your brain's job is to keep you safe, right? Your heart's job is to take heartfelt action. Okay. So if your brain was raised in an environment where you're on eggshells all the time, your orientation of fear is too great. Okay. And that limits your ability to take heartfelt action to your own benefit and to the benefit of others. And so you need to keep running this pattern that you're running, right? The pendulum needs to stay and swing all the way to the left and get stuck up here before you're willing to ask for help. Now, again, if you grew up in a household and in the environment, it was a safe environment, right? You were nurtured and held and kissed, and your parents were honest and sober with you, and they led by example, right? Yet they gave you enough room to make your own mistakes. And guess what? You see mistakes as the path to success. But when you grow up in a household and you're punished for making mistakes, you must see mistakes as the path to hell. And who would want to volunteer to put themselves in hell? So do everything you can to avoid making mistakes. Well, you become risk averse, right? And so the child who grows up to be the risk averse adult, all you need to do is sift through and filter through their childhood. And what you're going to find is they were raised in an environment where they were punished, humiliated, rejected consistently. And they grew up in an environment as well that had someone who was emotionally out of balance. And so they're going to do everything they can to be on either side of that. So they're either going to be an intense risk taker that takes way too much risk, or they're not going to take any at all. Because when you grow up in extremes, right? Extreme level of stress and distortion and dysfunction, you're either going to go all left or you're going to go all right. The middle line is the place that's the most vulnerable for you. Okay. And the middle line for me, I can relate from my own story. That was the vulnerable place for me to be content and to be consistent and to be receptive. That was vulnerable. That was scary. Okay. To take risks, sure. Let's jump out of a plane, right? With this little thing on your back. Let's dive at the deepest depths. Let's go through fire movement exercises with live rounds. Let's, start rolling C4 into specific shapes, right? And let's let's grab these detonators, right? That to me, it didn't feel like a big deal because I was already, the pendulum for me had swung too far to the right. But for the person who's too scared to hit the bottom rung, their pendulum is swung too far to the left. And so again, you become risk averse or too risky.
Homeostasis and balance is a beautiful thing. That's what we're all looking, right?
Yeah. Yet it's the most intimidating place for a child that grows up in a dynamic that's very uncomfortable. Right. And, children, they all want the same thing. They want to explore their environment. Like if you're a parent and you're listening, give your children the space they need to explore their environment and let them hurt themselves. Right. Let them, fall 3 feet. Right. Let them bump their knee. Let them learn about their environment.
It's interesting because when I was little, I ended up with stitches, twice when I was really young over my eyes. My parents thought I lost an eye once, tripped and fell into the corner of a glass table. And, but the thing was, I was, my parents still didn't hover over me and they allowed me to make those mistakes. And I look at children today, I don't have, but personally, I have lots of friends with children and they just, nothing, never been to the ER, never had even a scratch, they just hover over them. And they yell at them when they, move into the backyard and they restrict where they go. And they're always, is that not the exact thing you're talking about? Yeah. That further in life will make them to the left all the way.
Yeah, it will make them extremely anxious.
Right.
Right. They will become outwardly dishonest, maybe even inwardly dishonest. They will have an intense amount of frustration and agitation, irritation, and resentment boiling underneath. And they will be fearful to take risks that are relative to their potential. Like if you have someone, if you're as a parent, if you're lucky to have a kid that's born with a IQ that's 140, well, guess what? You want to give them an environment where they can really explore and get really curious, right? Let the environment teach them, right? When the parent is coherent, meaning if a parent's stress levels are at neutral, okay? Neutral it's not at pleasure, but it's not in pain, right? If a parent's stress levels are at neutral, they're going to create a neutral environment for their child. But if the parent is in anxiety, is in a fear state, is in a self-righteous state, if they're in physical pain and discomfort, guess what they're going to do? They're attempting to be good parents, and to be good parents for them is to avoid pain at all costs. You need mistakes in order to learn. Okay. That is the pathway to success. Failure is the greatest aspect of success. No failure, no success. Right? People have a natural talent and inclination on how to do things based on the type of intellect that they were born with. Some kids are born with high levels of emotional intelligence, right? Their analytical intelligence is kind of low. Other kids are born with amazing levels of instinctual intelligence. Other kids are born with a good sense of what's right and wrong. It's easy for them to be ethical and moral. And every child has their way where their form of intelligence and genius. And a parent's job is to foster that and to give them the space to do so. and to make the mistakes so they can learn. And when they start making mistakes and they learn and they get rewarded, which is what I teach parents, if you have a child who's here to learn through trial and error, you got to reward them when they make a mistake. And then you got to ask them a simple question. What did you learn from that experience? And leave them alone before they go to bed. Susie, what did you learn from that experience today? Think about it. And then maybe tomorrow morning or maybe 3 days later at the kitchen table for breakfast, she says, hey, Mom, I think this is what I learned. And you go, that's amazing. I learned that too. And now the child is willing to take more risks because they know at the end of the day, my parent's going to relate with me and I have an opportunity to fail. And I get rewarded for failure rather than punished. And if you can create an environment where your children are rewarded for making mistakes, and then you give them a process where they can internalize that experience by simply asking them this question, what did you learn from that mistake? You're going to have a child that thrives in the world, is willing to take risk and makes the world a better place because they're willing to take risks. If we in humanity choose to avoid mistakes, punishment, rejection, humiliation, violence, discomfort, pain, and death, we will stop evolving. And then we will have to rely on things like artificial intelligence in order to start to evolve as a race, because we've become too restricted in our ability to take risk, to explore, to express, to open, to be receptive, to be vulnerable, to be honest at an emotional level, internally and externally.
Do you feel we're at that tipping point right now? Because I look around, we're maybe you could say post-pandemic right now, but you still have a lot of people living in complete fear, averse of, everything, just, wearing the mask, still going that route. And we have this incredible acceptance of artificial intelligence, transhumanity, implanting chips, making technology do everything for us in a sense. And as I mentioned before when we were speaking, this idea of almost losing our divinity for that and kind of coming together into this transhuman, non-emotional, non-human state. Do you feel that we're entering this tipping point now where kind of humanity is resting a little bit uneasy on the edge of a cliff? And we need to act now to change that?
My feeling in this moment is you have stewards for change, and they're always going to be stewards for change. It's like, it's their thing, right? So however far humanity turns to the right, you're going to have the counterbalance of people that turn to the left, right? And as long as the United States has enough freedoms left where people like you and me, and probably a lot of people that are listening to this call, feel they have a right to express inalienable rights, then guess what's going to happen? We're going to be able to figure out how to find a balance. Like for me, when people first got cell phones, I remember watching, let's say you would go to a restaurant in the 80s and you're eating, everybody's communicating, right? Mm-hmm. I can go to a restaurant now. I was sharing with my lady. We were at a restaurant, and off to my right was a dad. He had 3 kids. He was sitting in a booth, and he was on his phone the whole time. And I thought, that didn't happen to me, so I don't know that, right? And you and I are in an age group where we got to experience life without technology. So I have no idea with the kids who grew up with technology, how they're going to cope with reality, because their sense of self is quite different than mine, right? I want a more tactile experience. And because I had a more tactile experience, like when I came home and it was winter, my grandmother said, go find your friends, go outside and play. And then when I got my first Atari, there were still moments where my grandmother was like, put down the Atari and go out and play. because she understood that social interaction was key because guess what? She was 45 years older than me. And so there was a point where she didn't have a TV. The only thing they had was a radio. And they got all their joy and fun out of relating with each other, out of exchanging emotional information, out of storytelling. And so children have a different way of experiencing this reality, and yet the tactile world is still there. And at some point, you will have to make a choice, and the choice will be to choose how you relate with technology. One of my students, I have a group chat for my practitioners, and one of the students texted today that I spend too much time on technology at the end of the night. And I choose to avoid commitments that I have with other people. And so she ends up breaking her word. But then the more that she breaks her word, the more willing she is to break her word, right? And so the key for me is with anything that you bring new into your life is, are you able to maintain a certain level of esteem, right? Are you able to transcend the fear that's inside of you? Are you able to be honest with yourself? And so the key for me really is all about honesty. I consider that to be the honorable quality. Some people are incredibly honest outwardly. Some people are incredibly honest inwardly. Most people are not good at both, right? And so my feeling is, as humanity evolves with its relationship with technology, if it can choose to be honest about how it makes it feel energetically, how it makes it feel emotionally, how it makes it feel mentally and psychologically, and how it makes it feel physically, if we can maintain a certain level of honesty, then I think we can evolve with technology in a way that is healthy and helpful. Because of technology, there's friends of mine that use this thing called the ring, and they're able to assess whether or not they had a good night's sleep, right? And there's ways to use technology to benefit humanity, and then there's ways to use it in which it disrupts our natural course that we've been on for thousands of years. And as you look deep into history and you start to understand that we aren't the first inhabitants on Earth, and that life with technology existed before and exists other places in the universe, it is inevitable that every society in the world and in the universe will eventually have to figure out how to relate with technology. And if the motivation is to better the life, then I'm okay with technology.
Mhm.
But if it's the motivation of the manufacturer to allow technology to take over humanity, then I'm not okay with that.
Yeah.
And so this comes down to the individual, this comes down to the family. If you're a parent and you let your kids be at a restaurant and sit on their phones and avoid communicating and talking, you're giving an aspect of themselves a very certain death sentence.
Mm.
They will not be socialized correctly, and they will deal with debilitating states of anxiety later on in their teenage years.
Mhm.
And when you lose the ability to communicate effectively your thoughts and your feelings, it's almost next to impossible to take heartfelt action to your own benefit and to the benefit of others, because you don't know what they need. You don't know what they desire. You don't know what they want. And if you don't know what they need and what they desire, what they want, how are you going to have a functional relationship that turns into something that's pleasurable?
Mm.
You're going to have a dysfunctional relationship that turns into something that's painful. And so, if you're a listener, the point is to all of this is to experiment and explore what works for you through an honest prism, with evaluating yourself emotionally, evaluating yourself physically, evaluating yourself psychologically, energetically, and spiritually. And if the technology that you're using is elevating all of those aspects of yourself, wonderful. But if it's depleting your core energy, Your eyes are getting tired. Your sleep patterns are more disruptive. You're using technology as escape away from communicating and relating with others around you, and it's avoidance pattern from your suffering, then you need to question your use of technology. Because the point here on earth is to simply explore and evolve, explore and evolve. And if you reduce your lifetime accumulated stress load enough, at the end of the day, what's going to happen? You're going to be able to be sober with yourself. You're going to be able to be in reality rather than living in fantasy. And most humans, they live in fantasy because fantasy exists in the stress matrix. Because I've successfully removed myself from the stress matrix, I've lost my privilege of living in fantasy. I've lost the privilege of living in fantasy. I have to be in reality. I have to go 2 + 2 = 4. I have to wake up in the morning and go, wow, my brain is foggy, my eyes are tired because I spent too much time on the internet last night. I don't have the ability to go, oh, well, my eyes are tired. I must just be getting old. No, I'm making specific choices of how to spend my time, my energy, and my efforts. And I have to be willing to look at the cost of those. And every human who is self-aware and self-realized is always assessing cost.
Technology is tricky like that. I see technology as a whole as neutral. It is just something we choose what we do with it, right?
Yeah.
Guns, a scalpel, anything could be neutral, meaning put it in the hands of someone, it saves a life, or it does this. Put in the hands of someone else, it's a killing machine. Technology is no different in some ways. I think, like you said, the intention of some humans behind the companies to make technology addictive and then give it to children. That's a little bit different. Yet at the end of the day, we still have a choice to give children that technology. At least parents should.
Yeah.
So then you still have freedom, even though it is created that way. You can choose to take it away from a child. So I do think that technology as a whole is something we are just beginning to learn about our interactions with it. And therefore, in the first generation of this, it's going to be difficult to change. But I do think in time, absolutely, if we don't allow it to overcome us in a sense and create too much stress. And that's where I want to talk to you about the true body intelligence system that you created. Because I do want people to hear about the process, because it can allow you to relieve some of that stress, to live in this world that we are in that seems so stress matrix-like, but detached from it somewhat. So can you guide us through the system itself, how you came about it, how people can get involved with it?
Yeah. I had pain, as I shared earlier, and I talked about systems and techniques that I use, like Feldenkrais and the Egoscue method. And then I talked about me needing to go a mile and them being able to take me an inch. And the reason for that is that the leverage that those systems generate is limiting. And so the beautiful thing is that we were endowed with a body that can use 3 different types of contractions, right? You can access concentric contractions to build strength. You can use isometric contractions to recruit more tissue. And you can use eccentric contractions to remove stress, tension, and distortion. The greatest of those 3 is the eccentric contraction. Why? Because it allows us to pull our body back together by reducing the amount of tension that's in the belly of the muscle. When the belly of the muscle gets long, it removes all of the excessive stress on the tendons and ligaments, because the bones move back into their proper alignment. When the bones are in proper alignment, no one ever has joint pain. No one. You can't have joint pain if your bones are in proper alignment. It's actually an impossibility, right? So where would the focus be? Well, guess what? Your mind, your emotions, and your spirit, they live in your body. So the body's the king. The mind will lie 1,000 lies. The body always tells the truth. And so in True Body Intelligence, what I've set up are 5 systems. Each one of these systems addresses a different aspect of the being. Okay. And so humans are separated into 4 worlds and they have 7 different layers. Right. And so when someone comes to me that has a husband who is practicing infidelity as a way of reliving the degradation of the inappropriate relationship they had with their mother, then I've got to be able to address this from all sides, right? I got to be able to address it from the generational side. So I use a system called Body of Light, which allows me to use the spoken word to access where these disjointed levels of consciousness live. And then we defragment and pull that aspect of their consciousness back into alignment. Let's say somebody comes in and they're like, my back is stiff. I've done everything. I've been to yoga classes. Nothing's working. I use a system called ice-centric strength. And what I do with ice-centric strength, we use isometric, eccentric, and concentric contractions to pull that aspect of their body back into balance. So it's very physical. Other people, they're emotionally out of balance, right? And they come to me and I use a system called Maher. And what I do is I use my feet. And with this rhythm in combination with very specific breathing pattern, I get their breath to match their true level of sensation, the typical person that I've met, whether they're 7 or they're 77, from my research, and I've done 100,000 hours of practical research into this field. The average human is about 86.4% of their maximal saturation of stress, tension, and distortion held in their physical body. That's the average, right? Which means there's people that are above that, and there's some people that are slightly below that. But the average Joe, the average Jane is easily at 86.4, 86.5, 86.6%. So when I go into the machine and we get their breath to match their true level of sensation, you know what happens? That discomfort level that's a 10 out of 10, it drops down immediately. Had a woman here yesterday, lovely human, right? We're working on that part of her body. And she's like, oh, it's like a 6. So I know the process. So I said, why don't you bring your breath up to a 6? So her discomfort level was a 6. Her breath was at a 1. She brought her breath up to a 6. So the emotional body controls the breath. The emotional body is the body's ability to feel. So guess what she started to feel? More sensation. Then she went from a 6 to a 7. A couple minutes later, she went from a 7 to an 8. And then she got to the point where she's like, I'm at a 10. And then like 3 minutes later, she's like, I'm at an 11 out of 10. And then she got all the way up to 13 out of 10. And I said, keep matching your breath with the sensation. And boom, suddenly she went from 13 to 12 to 11 to 10 to 9 to 8 to 7, 6, 5 to 4. And that happened over a matter of like 15 minutes. So she went from pure pain and discomfort to neutrality. And so I've created these very unique ways of working with the body and the energy to reduce your lifetime accumulated stress load. And if someone wants to develop themselves in a way where they feel very magnetic, very excited, very electric, I use a system called Shocking, which stands for shaking medicine, that the Kalahari Bushmen invented, which is a minimum of 60,000 years old. It's in their history, they'll tell you. And then I teach them how to do these things to themselves, because for me, I want them to be empowered. Like codependent, I'm allergic to codependent, dependent professional relationships. Okay. All right. I'm okay with some codependent, dependent relationships in my interpersonal relationships because I can't control where the people in my life are in their development. Right. I can be an example, but I can't control them. And So professionally, though, I have some control on how I'm going to relate with this other person. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to be able to teach them how to use Vestercise and how to use transmutations and attunements to bring their body, brain, and nervous system every single day into supreme alignment. I was in New Jersey recently, and there's this young man who's had a hate-filled relationship with with the people in his life. And all I did was educate, remove tension and stress and distortion, checks in every day. He says, "Hey, I had a good day today." The next day, "Oh, I had a good day today." The next day, "Oh, I had a good day today." Why? Because I taught him how to remove the daily accumulated stress that he has, and also how to remove a chunk of his lifetime accumulated stress load. So every day he becomes less anxious and more excited. Every day he becomes less fearful and more confident. Every day he becomes less angry and more loving. And every day he becomes less self-righteous and more righteous relative to himself, his family, his community. And so we use all of these systems to simply reduce the lifetime accumulated stress. Why? Because when your lifetime accumulated stress load reaches a certain level, you are hired and required to have a chronic symptom. So anyone, any listener that's tuned in right now, what you have to understand is that every single symptom that every single person has is related to some level of unresolved, lifetime accumulated generational stress, tension, and distortion. Everyone's. When you reduce the lifetime accumulated stress, tension, and distortion, the symptom disappears because now you're addressing the problem. At the beginning of the call, we alluded to a very specific idea, but now I'm just going to give you a basic formula. You have a child that has a traumatic experience, right? Because they're in a precognitive state of function, they then choose a strategy to deal with that environment. What are they dealing with? They're dealing with, how am I going to avoid moving forward this punish, this rejection, this humiliation, and this violence? Once the child employs that strategy and they have success with it, it becomes their winning strategy for life. I want you to get that. Once a child employs a strategy to avoid punishment, rejection, humiliation, violence, discomfort, and pain, and they have success with it, it becomes their winning strategy for life. Now, as this child again employs the same strategy again and again and again and again, they get further away from their authentic self. And the only way that you can have pain in your body, pain in your mind, pain in your emotions, pain in your energy. Pain in your energy simply means you being without energy and being exhausted, okay? Or you're unethical, immoral, or unprincipled. The only way you can get to that position is how? Is by being inauthentic. Because when your nervous system recognizes your winning strategy as yourself, now you're screwed. You're really screwed, because now your mind and your kidneys, they're becoming more split, right? You're over adapting and you're over adjusting constantly to avoid punishment, rejection, humiliation, discomfort, pain, and death. As you employ this strategy hundreds of thousands of times, you start to build a massive amount of unresolved stress, which turns into a minute amount of physical tension. Do that decade after decade after decade. And now you have a 35-year-old woman who shows up to your father's office who has migraine headaches for the last 16 years. And there's no pill that she can take to deal with this, because the body is attempting to go, hey, Jane, listen, we want you to look away from the symptom, and we want you to ask yourself a basic question. What's the real problem here? Why is this happening to me? Because when you ask the why, you now have a chance to investigate how you got to where you are. Without the why, you're only going to continue to attempt to manage through negative stress management tools. What are negative stress management tools? Alcohol, caffeine, nicotine, dishonesty, food colorings, preservatives, refined white and brown sugar, recreational drugs, and pharmaceutical drugs. And so you've got negative stress management tools that you're now addicted to. Why are you addicted to them? Because they allow you to numb out from the fact that you're no longer authentically being you, and that your survival strategy has completely taken over your body, your brain, and your nervous system. And it's screaming out for help. Your stiff back is your authentic, true self screaming out to your inauthentic, fragmented, negatively conditioned self for help. So if you've got a headache, it's because you're inauthentic. If you got a backache, it's because you're inauthentic. If you've got poor sleep patterns, it's because you're inauthentic. And these levels of inauthenticity were passed off to you by your mom and your dad. So any level of pain, discomfort, distortion, and tension and stress that's unresolved always leads back to your survival strategy. But why would I be employing a survival-based strategy? Because we're just now coming out of the dark ages. Okay. 500 years ago, would a woman ever walk to a market on her own? No, because if she did, she could be kidnapped, raped, or killed. Okay. No woman was like, oh, hey, honey, I'm going to walk 1.5 miles to the market. The husband was like, no, you're not. Okay. Going to go by yourself. Son, get my sword. All right. Put it in the back of the cart. And, you had to be in a hyper vigilant state at all times, because guess what? Your choices meant death when you made bad, poor choices. Okay. So as we were talking about evolution earlier, we're now evolving out of survival-based strategy. We can start to look at them. That's why in society, you now hear things like mental illness. Humanity has been mentally ill for thousands and thousands of years. Okay. And now we're like, oh, I feel mentally ill. No. Your whole family has been mentally ill for a long time. You come from you have a string of alcoholics going all the way back to Ireland. Okay. You have a string of alcoholics going all the way back to Germany, right? You have a string of stress that if you go back 5, 6, 7, 8 generations, you're going to be able to see how that history led to your chronic discomfort, pain, and challenge. It's historical. We're now finally in a place, because of technology and guys like you and guys like me and guys like your dad and women like us that are out in the world researching, investigating, and creating other opportunities for other humans to learn that they don't have to live with the discomfort, the pain, and the distortion that they're living with on a daily basis, and that there's an opportunity for freedom. These freedoms were never offered to our ancestors. They had to suck it up and move on, and suck it up and move on, because if you were a trailblazer like your dad is 100 years ago, guess what? You could be burned at the stake. Okay. Right? If you took a holistic mindset and you went up against certain establishments, that could cost not only you your life, but your family's life. So we've been locked into these survival-based strategies, and we finally now can take a look at the cost of staying plugged into the stress matrix and refusing to create opportunities for choices that allow us to raise our energy level to such heights that we realize we're here to serve and to love ourselves first, and those we care about second. And when I can be in a position of serving myself, I then can serve my family. And then out of serving my family, I can now serve my community. And then out of my community, I can now service my culture. And then I reach out and I go, wow, we're in a position, we have this internet. I can now be of service to the globe. And so my story has been one of trial and tribulation, challenge with pain, and transforming that pain into neutrality so that I can experience pleasure and teach others to do so, so they no longer have to be stuck in survival-based strategies, and they can thrive at taking risks to figure out who they are in relationship to money, who they are in relationship to sex, who they are in relationship to religion, who they are in relationship to profession, who they are in relationship to education. Before, these weren't choices. You simply were mimicking the stress patterns, the distortion patterns from the generations before. So now we're lucky to have enough freedom to be able to film what you're filming and deliver it to other people who are thriving and thirsty to feel good at an emotional level, to feel good at a physical level, to feel good at a family level, to feel good in their relationship, to be successful financially, to be successful at simply being open-minded, grounded, vulnerable, peaceful, happy, joyful, and at peace with a grounded, quiet mind and grounded emotions and a flexible, strong, comfortable body and an effervescent spirit. We now can have that. Every human on the planet can now have that. That was not possible before. It's now possible. And I came here to make sure that there's a pathway that others can follow.
But when you look at things from that macroscopic view you just discussed, we're living in beautiful times in many ways. When you look in the micro, you could say, oh my God, we're on the brink of World War III, the pandemic, this and that, and you could be you're in the stress matrix.
Yeah.
And you say it's the worst of times.
Yes.
But if you just take a step back, and I know people don't do this because we live in such micro 15-second everything now terms and such short attention spans, but really take a step back, as you just said, not even 100 years ago, what would you have? How much freedom did you really have? How many opportunities did you have then? Now 500, a completely different story. Like you said, you better be carrying that sword. If you made it at 30, man, are you old, right? And you had no opportunity to move up and down really that much. So I think people need to realize that also. We all deal with our stress. We're in this matrix, but it is truly a beautiful time. We have so much, and we have the opportunity to connect with each other like this even, which we didn't very long ago. So it really
have
is.
Solutions.
Yeah.
We have solutions. We have solutions. If you're willing to take a risk, there are things in the world that do what they say and say what they do, and all they require is a little bit of effort, a little bit of commitment, a little bit of time, and you can shift from a survival-based strategy into a thriving-based strategy. And who would want anything different than that? Right. People who are severely stressed because they're stuck in survival-based thought patterns. So you asked me earlier, what could people be doing? Do everything you can to create a successful pattern interrupt into your pattern. Mm-hmm. If you're an alcoholic, figure out how to interrupt the pattern. If you're a drug addict, figure out how to interrupt the pattern. If you're a pathological liar, figure out how to interfere with the pattern. If you're a sex addict, figure out how to interrupt the pattern. If you're into domestic violence, figure out how to interrupt the pattern. Do everything you can to interrupt the pattern. And once you do, guess what? A new pattern begins. And you're actually rebirthing into your new authentic self. And that's what I hope people take away from today's conversation. Willing to take a little bit of a risk.
I hope so too, because on the other side, that risk is again something beautiful in this beautiful world, and you could start to really, really, enjoy it and come into that authentic self, which is to me is the highest, healthiest self of you.
Yeah.
In the authentic state, disease does not persist.
Mm.
And that's what people, miss. They want the pill, the fix. It's all inside. They're just not being authentic with themselves. And that's what
right.
medicine needs to acknowledge as well, is that,
Yeah.
the job in medicine isn't to provide, I would say, the solution itself, but to provide the person with the environment to have the solution, which is within them.
Yeah. And as long as you have an industry that's dishonest, it's going to have people who mirror their dishonesty, right? And that's why I said earlier, honesty is the most honorable quality because you're willing to sit down, look in the mirror, look in your own eyes, and ask yourself some basic questions. How did I get here? What is this really about? Um, do I really want to get out of this thing that I'm experiencing? And be honest with yourself. Because as men like you and me and women like us move into the world and are really honest with their message about the pain that they've been in, about the discomfort that they've experienced, about the anxieties that they've had, about the fears that have crippled their ability to make to take action and make choices that are relevant to who it is they really are. When humans get an opportunity to thrive and to ask those more honest questions, the universe will provide more honest answers, right? But when you have an industry that lives in dishonesty because the manufacturers of the medication that they're creating are choosing to ignore all of the data, right? Like if I am a manufacturer of medicine, whether that's holistic or it's allopathic, and it injures and hurts one person, it is a false conclusion that I've come to.
Mm.
And if I'm willing to continue to push false conclusions on to the public around me for the purpose of transacting business and making profit, then I need to look at myself. And so what's happening, which is fun and exciting in one way, is people are starting to wake up to the limitations of dishonesty
Mm-hmm.
at a manufacturing, at a political, at a educational, and at a financial level. And the more that people wake up, the more it forces those industries to change, to be more honest, right? Like these opioid companies that are having to deal with these $1 billion lawsuits, right? They're getting scientists and other manufacturing companies of medicines to think twice of like, ooh, maybe we should invest all this money and all this time and effort into producing something that we know has a limited result. Maybe there's an opportunity to focus on resolution as opposed to management. Who wants to manage disease when you can resolve it?
Absolutely.
Why would you want to manage it when you could resolve it? And all you had to do was filter back through the history of your lineage to begin to understand what your ancestors went through and to create successful pattern interrupts. As you said, disease cannot thrive in an environment of self-realization. It can't. Because when you're self-realized, you're transcending dis-ease through your self-realization, being self-aware, right? Being conscious, being awake, and enlightening yourself and investigating who it is you are in relationship to the things that you're experiencing. And when you have that tool, you literally are removing yourself from stress matrix. And the more people that remove themselves from stress matrix, the less power and energy that the stress matrix has. Because then the stress matrix goes, oh, well, actually, what they want is something else. They want pleasure now. Well, let me give them pleasure. But as long as people are plugged into pain, as long as they're plugged into depression, as long as they're plugged into suppression, as long as they're plugged into oppression, denial, narcissism, borderline behavior, schizophrenia, paranoia, indecisiveness, addiction, disempowerment, sadism, masochism, as long as they're plugged into brainwashing themselves into believing things that are false, we will continue, or let's say they will continue to suffer through pain. Because pain is the indicator that you have brainwashed yourself into something that's untrue and false. Because in truth and in alignment, there is no pain. In truth and alignment, there is no anxiety. In truth and alignment, there is no hate. In truth and alignment, there is no fear. So what's the prudent thing to do? Reduce your lifetime accumulated stress load by 50% so you can get into neutrality. Mm. And use the systems that I've been developing to help you do so.
And that's how you can become free for life, which is the name of your book, right?
There you go.
Tell us, Christopher, where can they find Free for Life and connect with you?
I think the most powerful way to experience Free for Life is through the audio version of the book, which is on my website at truebodyintelligence.com. If you are more tactile and you feel the need to turn pages, great. Or I suggest both copies. Get the audio book so that when you're in your car and you're at the gym, listen to it again. I tell people, listen to it a minimum of 3 times, because every time you're going to go deeper into the messages that are ripe for you and there to help you get a deep understanding of how did you get to where you are and how do you get out of it.
Beautifully said. This was really an enlightened conversation. I mean, I could talk to you all day, but we've been here for a while. I want to respect your time. You got a lot to do. So, hey, Christopher, thank you so much for coming on. Come back on and again.
Thank you.
I'd love to have more of this discussion, but
me too.
Wishing you all the best and hoping people do, reach out and tap into all of this that you set up and how many people you're helping.
Well, thank you. And I forgot one thing.
Yeah, please.
The website is called truebodyintelligence.com.
Yes.
True body intelligence. Okay. The answers are in the name. Okay. Go there, read, research. I even put some music on there. I'm a singer, songwriter, artist, producer, and there's some good quality music that'll help you relax in the background. Right. Soulful vibes that will, no matter how stressed you are, I promise you, if you put on one of these songs within 5 minutes, you're going to be relaxed. Okay.
That's the beauty of music. It is frequency, It is vibration, it is energy, and it could bring us into that neutral and balanced state. Yes. Beautiful.
Well, it was fun for me. Thank you for opening up giving me access to share with your people something I feel is important and near and dear to my heart and what I'm passionate about, which is serving people and helping humanity wake up in the ways which I feel are important.
Well, thank you so much. And if you're listening, you don't have to be a former Navy SEAL to be in a constant state of stress. That requires intention and mindfulness to establish a calmer nervous system, as Christopher has laid out here today. So until next time, I wish you freedom for life and continue to write your own healing story.